Cannibal had made up his mind a few moves ago. If this kid doesn't swing this chair, doesn't absolutely fucking nail me, then he's getting taxed. And big time. The kid's name is Rob Small, and he's supposedly some hotshot rookie fresh out of the local school. But Cannibal doesn't get it. Everything about the kid bugs him, right down to the name. The sport lost something when people stopped calling themselves ridiculous things, like the Big This or Ultimate That. And besides, it's a dirty trick. It's too easy, just like everything the new kids are doing. It's almost too real. And the audience doesn't want real. They only think they do. Cannibal knows this better than just about anyone. Cannibal feels that he's been carrying them both since the bell rang. Again, it's this new soft shit. Flipping and posing, and nobody wants to get a single scratch on their pretty mugs. The word fake doesn't exist in this business, but as Rob winds up for another one of his little tricks, all flair, no impact, you can kinda see where people get that idea. Cannibal takes a knee, and then another, but wide, because that's how you take a real hit. Rob pulls the chair back. "Don't fuck this up," Cannibal says. The blade of the chair just grazes Cannibal's eyebrow, opening 2 inches of scar tissue and perforation. This is good. Unintentional, but good. The crowd isn't theirs yet, but the stream of blood pulls a few people forward and gets them almost leaning into the next row down. The blood is good, no doubt about it, but the sound of skull on steel would have lit them on fire, and that's just science. Rob moves to the ropes, taking a squeaky clean moment to acknowledge the crowd. He waves his arms around like he's leading a marching band or something, and it earns him a small pop of recognition. Here's the problem. There's no story here. No tale of the tape. Just some rookie nobody cares about, and an aging prick that people care even less about. This is when every move is supposed to count. Not just every move, but every transition, every facial expression too. The kid's athletic, sure, but so is everybody. He doesn't have the rhythm yet, and his nose is too straight. And Cannibal is tired of carrying this match. Cannibal starts back on his feet quickly, counterintuitively, like a jump scare. The kid's finally connecting with the crowd now, lifting the chair like some intramural trophy. But it's too little, too late, and Cannibal sees his opportunity. First, Cannibal snatches the chair up, then steadies his giant, calloused fingers with a well-timed exhale. He whirls Rob around, ready or not, and drives the lip of the chair into the liver side of his waist, which folds him directly in two. The crowd chatters a bit, but he isn't finished. Cannibal throws the chair less than a foot away, then sets up the move that's going to win the crowd. He didn't invent the move, not even close. It's not even particularly uncommon, but he made his name off this move. Here's some wisdom from the old school. There are precious few people who make money from this business by looking good. And if you can't look good, you need to look vicious. Cannibal hooks his arms under Rob's armpits, then wrenches both arms so violently that the triceps almost touch. Operating on pure panic and instinct, Rob's legs unwind, independently searching for a better position, but never finding it. "Hey, easy up there," Rob says from somewhere near Cannibal's midsection, but he may as well be speaking to the mat now. Cannibal wrenches Rob's arms again, but this time the triceps touch for one moment of searing pain. He does this half for show, and half as a warning to keep quiet during his finisher. He looks out at the crowd, and their features form for the first time since he entered the arena. Before then, they were nothing. Just a wallpaper pattern of merch and facial hair. There's a difference between individual faces in the first row and the voice that fills the venue and guides your match. A single fan can be wrong, but the crowd never is. But Cannibal takes some of that power back now, and he's staring at the crowd, the entity right in front of his face, starting with the first row. The first few faces he locks eyes with are rabid, their eyes wild with anticipation. They're gesticulating wildly, like they can't believe or can't wait for what's coming next. The next face is a little boy who shies away and looks at his dad for help. He scans about a seating section and a half, screaming spittle-seasoned insults along the way. Mid-taunt, before anybody can count it off, Cannibal hits his finisher, the Flesh Eater. Cannibal pushes off the toes of his boots about a foot into the air, bringing Rob's craned arms with him. That's why you really need to wrench. With Rob feeling real pain in each arm's socket, he has no choice but to sell. At the height of his jump, Cannibal shoots his legs straight out in a wide V, unclenching his ass for a nice, cushioned landing. Rob's face hits the chair a microsecond before Cannibal's legs, and the underside absorbs the remainder of the blow. It's enough to make the aluminum ring out into a high warehouse ceiling and put a pretty little face-sized dent in the seat. The crowd reacts with screams, with horror, and finally, some fucking emotion. Cannibal climbs to his feet while the lights flick on and off in Rob's eyes. Rob props himself on his palms and knees, finding the floor he wasn't even looking for, but he loses it again with a big booted punt to the ribs. The crowd boos now from every direction. This is good. It means that right now, they hate Cannibal. It means that when they go home, they'll remember how much they hated him. It means that he did his job. Cannibal takes a victory lap around the ring while Rob writhes in presumably authentic agony. Cannibal leans over the top rope, pointing at the front row again, dissolving the boundary between them. He's screaming at a fan. He may even be screaming at 100 fans when he notices a face that shouldn't be in attendance. Was it Section B? He looks over, but he can't find the face anymore. He darts his eyes wildly, unfocusing them so that the crowd transforms into nothing but eyebrows and merch, approval, and disgust. He glances back towards Section B, right around where he thinks he saw the face, right as Rob crawls from behind, hooks his leg, and rolls him into a 3 count. Both men roll onto their backs. Rob, because of the pain from his neck down to his waist, puts him there. Cannibal, because he's defeated and confused. Had he really seen that face? He knows he hadn't. 1, because that would make no sense. And 2, because, and he only saw it for a second, but the face was significantly younger than it should have been. About 20 years younger, which would put it right around a time that he doesn't think or speak about. Cannibal decides that he didn't see the face after all. He doesn't believe in ghosts. Especially ghosts that haven't died. Cannibal collects his pay, and the doc plugs up his gash, in that order. He's got a show in a bigger market tomorrow, so the butterfly stitches just need to hold until then. He unlaces his boots in the parking lot, then trades them for some once white Adidas from the back seat of his gray Toyota Camry. Then he thinks about the ghost again. The one that he didn't see. The one that isn't even dead as far as he knows. He stands still in his untied sneakers and thumbs a few reps through his social pages. If he had died, the news would have picked it up by now. An old friend would have even messaged, "Here if you need to talk," or "It's not your fault." Something like that anyway. But Cannibal doesn't see anything. No messages, neither of their names gracing or disgracing any headlines. And besides, that doesn't exactly solve the issue at hand. Maybe the kids are right, he thinks. I've officially taken too many blows to the skull. For 20 years, Cannibal has always driven to the next city, or the next stop on the road the night prior. Tonight, he checks into the nearest hotel or rest stop that connects to the main road. It's only about a 4-hour drive, 3 if he can avoid traffic, and the need to piss. He doesn't even need to check into the venue until 5 p.m. That's ample time, he decides for the first time in his career. I just need a bed and a shower, Cannibal tells the night clerk, a pimply boy who has deepened his voice since the exchange intensified. He's the only employee, except for a few maids pushing yellow baskets around the parking lot, and a few unofficially affiliated girls prowling around from the local skin bar. The boy wants to avoid a hassle. He knows that the nearest signs of life are the old warehouse a few exits down, and the sheriff's office even further. I'm sorry, sir, he begins, and he's really using diaphragm now, speaking to the back of the house. But all we've got left tonight is the honeymoon suite. So it's $30 extra for a dirty mirror on the ceiling and a vase full of plastic fucking roses? The clerk winces at the swear, then gleams over Cannibal's right shoulder into the mostly empty parking lot. Cannibal gives the kid his best mean mug, the same one that he'd shoot toward a new opponent or a crowd that hates his guts. The quiet moment lingers, And then, wouldn't you guess it, just like that, $30 gets shaved off the tab. Cannibal tosses his duffel onto the frilly red sheets, then rolls off his sneakers as his reflections oblige in both the ceiling and wall-length mirrors. He sits on the bed, then wiggles his toes a bit, generating a sound like gravel crunching in a driveway. He wants to get up and shower off some of the dried blood that's clotted his hair to his face. But the world rocks and spins, and he lays down and falls asleep without even killing the bedside lamp. He can't remember the ramp, or the fans, or the bell. He can't remember the promos or what angle he's supposed to be taking. But judging from the dark cherry splatted canvas and the ringing in his ears, it's been a fucking barn burner so far. He looks directly ahead, at the high pipe-laden ceiling, and realizes he's on his back. A boot lands next to his head, then another. Maybe it's the high-intensity discharge of the lights that are stinging his eyes. Maybe he's rattled from whatever move put him on his ass. But as his opponent steps over him, he can't seem to make out their face. Whoever his opponent is, he begins to pick him up by the hair. And that's when Cannibal notices the abstract art on the mat has mostly come from the back of his head. Drops of blood race down his opponent's wrists and pool near his elbows. Cannibal is bent over, looking down at the mat, at his opponent's standard issue black boots, and at the fresh coat of bright red, which will soon dry darker. His opponent cranks his arms clumsily, but with intensity. He can feel his blood greasing his opponent's grip, not allowing for any real traction. Then his opponent's knees square up and then bend, and Cannibal realizes, "Hey, that's my fucking move," he says, or tries to say, but his opponent's airborne, and then, so is he. Usually there's a nice thud when you hit the mat, but not this time. This time it sounds more like a series of wet pops, like cracking your knuckles underwater. Cannibal tries to roll over and assess the situation. Then he tries to roll over again. Oh, shit. He's face down on the mat, and he intuits rather than feels his opponent hurry off of him. And in that same foggy way, he can feel the crowd. The beast with 1,000 eyes is silent, but it isn't bored. It's murmuring, but with a sort of upward inflection, like it's asking him a question he can't answer. Now a referee rolls him over. Cannibal awakens in a panic and tries to jump out of bed, away from the red sheets, but his body is uncooperative. His head lolls to an unnatural angle toward the mirrored wall. He can move his eyes, but nothing else. He wants to scream for the pimply-faced boy or one of the night girls, but nothing comes out of his mouth. He can see his reflection, the collapsed muscles in his face, the pool of spit that's collected on the pillow by his ear. The parts of the bed directly under him appear a darker red than the rest of the sheets. His eyes roll wildly and take in different parts of the same wall that he's frozen on. He can barely feel his breathing, but he knows that it's sporadic and shallow. He keeps rolling his eyes, searching for a modicum of control over his own body. And that's when he sees him again. The ceiling mirror casts its reflection into its wall's counterpart. With the furthest strain of his eyeball muscles, Cannibal can just barely recognize him. He's a little older than he looked in the crowd earlier, but it's unmistakable this time. Fucking ghosts. Ghosts who aren't even dead yet. From somewhere behind his eyes, Cannibal feels the onset of rage. His eyes blink involuntarily, and a well of tears are pushed and guided down into the spit-soaked pillow. He imagines himself rocking forward and tries to send this signal to a part of his body that doesn't exist. He imagines it again. He tries to kick a leg, throw an elbow, he'll settle for anything. He sends that signal in random intervals like he's trying to surprise his own faculties. He throws another elbow, except this time, his arm releases from his side and soars out in front of him. His body follows, and he feels a vile concoction of fear and relief as he falls off the bed, with arms and legs too weak to break his fall. He narrowly avoids contact with the corner of the nightstand and lands with a thud on the carpeted floor. He wiggles his toes, and the sound of tires on gravel rings out into nothing. After regaining some strength, Cannibal uses his recently renewed limb strength to tear through every creak and crack of the hotel room. He finds nobody in the room, nobody in the mirrors, just himself in his aching fucking cranium. Exhausted, but no longer tired, Cannibal grabs his duffel and checks out of the hotel room by tossing his keys in the general direction of the unsuspecting clerk. He tears his car door open, then drives off with only a half plan in mind. The morning sun breaks as Cannibal pulls up to a red light and rereads his early morning text to the promoter. "Can't make it tonight. I'll make it up to you somehow." He's never backed out of a show before, and he knows he'll have to confront that fact soon. But right now, it doesn't seem to matter. He needs to see him. He cobbles his route out of the headlines and news stories that manages to search up between red lights and stop signs. Where are they now? 6 wrestlers whose careers ended in tragedy. The real story of Ernie the Eagle Sampson, former world champion contender in hospice after 20-year battle. Cannibal's mind races as single sentences fire out of him like shrapnel. He scrolls past his own names, both gimmick and government, a few times over. He feels the rage, and tears form behind his eyes again. "You weren't the only one who lost your legacy that day, you prick." After 20 years, he knows these roads well enough to cruise over the hospice unassisted by a map or GPS. He acknowledges his thoughts as his motions become routine. Ernie Sampson was poised to become the next big thing, back before all wrestling territories got swallowed up by the big guy in the corporate machine. He was a handsome bastard, and a city man with the strength of a farm boy. He could talk fear into the crowd without raising his voice. And he pulled women who didn't know and didn't care what he did for a nightly living. Cannibal hated him, but in a brotherly way that was steeped in admiration. Even in those times, Cannibal was more brutish and uglier than everyone in the locker room. It was a stroke of momentary genius when some otherwise dipshit promoter first suggested that they pair up. Some sort of Beauty and Brawn type gimmick. The monster and his mouthpiece. And you know what? It worked. People ate that shit right up. Cannibal chewed through his opponents with ferocity, while Ernie dazzled the crowd with his mixture of strong style flips and tricks. They melted the imaginary territory perimeters and became shooting stars in every market they played. Men paid off their tabs at the bar, and Ernie was gracious enough to send some trim Cannibal's way every now and then. It was a nice system, comfortable even. Then that dipshit promoter had another bright idea. The team was ready to break up. The way he had described it, they'd take all that heat they'd amassed together and cover double the ground. This storyline was unnatural, mostly because it was real. What the promoter was saying, in his dickhead way, was that Cannibal had served his purpose. He'd put the real star in place for his meteoric rise. Cannibal looked at where his career was and how far it had come, and he agreed. They'd go out in one final bloodbath of a match and defeat their current rivals, the Maniacs. Then Cannibal would attack Ernie, severing their ties and launching their individual careers. Cut, dry. Right up until the end, the match stands in Cannibal's memory as his finest work. If he had been vicious before, he was rabid in this match. The hits were real, the emotions were high, and the crowd invested in every last pectoral twitch. After nearly half an hour of slogging and bruising, Cannibal hit his finisher and covered his opponent to the tune of 20-something thousand fans screaming. As the 3 count fell, the crowd hit a decibel that he had never heard before. They were screaming so loud that it almost dampened in volume and became a whisper in his ears. The Maniacs had done their job well, bloodying and bruising Cannibal and Ernie for a gruesome glamour shot that would make the following day's paper. That image of Ernie raising Cannibal's arm before the inevitable turn would haunt almost every article written about either of them from that day forward. Soaked in the moment and each other's blood, Ernie hoisted Cannibal's arm, and they spun the ring, facing every single fan in attendance. Normally, you'd wait for a break in the volume before the next big moment, but this crowd had no intention of quieting down. They faced each other, and Ernie mouthed the words, "You ready?" To this day, Cannibal doesn't exactly know what went wrong. First, he felt sadness. Then he felt anger. He realized that the cheers wouldn't end for Ernie, but there was a very real possibility that this was his own last big pop. He went ahead as planned. First, with an absolutely brutal kick to the midsection, which softened Ernie's abs into dough. Ernie let out a real dry cough as the crowd's cheers morphed into shock and confusion. Then he craned his arms, clumsily, but with intensity. Ernie's arms were slick with blood, and Cannibal couldn't sink in his hooks correctly. His legs shot out gracelessly, and rather than hearing the cushioned thud of his own ass, he heard a sick, wet pop. Cannibal notes that he is about one exit from the hospice, and he shakes his head vigorously as if to erase his thoughts. The exit approaches, and he cuts in deftly. He is immediately greeted by a green, bustling town in a decent Midwestern neighborhood. He cruises towards the hospice, passing a few young couples and their church-clothed children. Bells chime nearby, and a dog emits a medium-sized bark from a nearby public park. Cannibal glances in his rearview mirror as he changes lanes. Ernie is seated behind the middle console, smirking, but with no joy in his eyes. Cannibal tries to scream, but can't. With the wheel slightly angled for his turn, Cannibal cruises subtly across lanes, onto the sidewalk, then into the park. The first few couples dive out of the way with synchronized but inharmonious shrieks. A young man pushes his wife and child to the ground, and the driver's side front wheel crunches and shatters his ankle. The next few people aren't so lucky. A group of friends sprawled across a picnic blanket snap around towards the source of the commotion, just in time to greet the Toyota Camry's fender. Cannibal's eyes dart between his windshield and the rear view where Ernie sits smirking. He sees a young woman snatched from his sightline and hears a gunshot of a pop as the back of her skull smacks against some concrete. Tears roll down Cannibal's face as he wills his arms, legs, or fucking anything to move. The litter of bodies test the car's shocks as the wheels find their way over strange terrains of bone and flesh. Then, a street lamp. Cannibal's forehead smacks against his wheel a millisecond before the airbags deploy. He flinches, and his arms twitch as the bag chafes his nose and brow. He has regained control of his movement, if only slightly. He kicks open the door, but not to face the trail of mayhem that has succumbed to his vehicle. Instead, he realizes that he is just one block away from the hospice. With the remaining screams a comfortable distance behind him, he half runs, half stumbles to the reception desk. People react to Cannibal's arrival with appropriate confusion and terror. The butterfly stitches have ceased to hold, and a rigid pattern of blood trails him as he staggers across the linoleum tile. "Sir, do you need help?" "Samson. I need Ernie fucking Samson." He peers over the desk and sees a directory of sorts, like a cheat sheet of hospice patients and their assigned rooms. He leaks blood from his brow over the counter and onto the sheet, and the seated receptionist recoils with disgust as he snatches and reads it. Ernie Samson, 211. Cannibal marches now on sturdy feet to the nearest stairwell. A small security guard attempts to stand in his way, but Cannibal dwarfs his face with his gigantic palm and smashes it into the drywall behind him, eliciting a collective gasp from the lobby waiting room. He kicks open the stairwell door and drags himself up the single flight of stairs onto the landing. Then, he kicks open the second door. Nurses gasp and take a step back as he emerges from the stairwell, ferocity emblazoned across his face and written in his scar tissue. He observes the direction in which the numbered rooms flow and stomps towards room 211. Half a dozen people are standing outside of the room, with hospital staff accounting for only 2 of them. "Bradley?" an older woman asks as Cannibal tears past her and into the room. Inside the room is a white sheet spread over a series of lumps on a slightly inclined bed. A young man is seated near the side of the bed where the railing has been temporarily removed. His eyes are bloodshot and his cheeks are damp. "Brad, what the fuck is..." he begins to say. Cannibal lifts his leg and boots the man right off of the green cushioned chair. Then he turns to the white lumps and tears the blanket off. Ernie's face appears as it did in the back seat, but without the rigid smirk. The muscles in his face are weak and sag as if they had collapsed several years before his death. His dull eyes are still open, still staring at Cannibal. "Ernie, you fucking prick!" Cannibal starts. "You fucking prick! You get back here right now! You gonna fuck with me? You gonna fuck with me, Ernie? I fucking made you, Ernie! We both fucking died that day!" A small militia of security guards pour into the room, and it takes every last one of them to restrain Cannibal. He fights and squirms as the fattest guard sits on the wide of his back and pulls his arms. Cannibal thrashes and screams like an animal as he is restrained. He bashes his face into the tiled floor, leaving increasingly large spots of blood at the site of impact. The fat guard applies some pressure to his hold as a small, wet pop emits from Cannibal's back. There's no story here, no tale of the tape. Just a has-been wrestler in tomorrow's headlines, and a family mourning a loss that had begun 2 decades prior. The crowd of mourners gasp and scream as all the fight leaves Cannibal's body at once. Then a woman breaks into sobs. She used to know Bradley Hughes, the real Cannibal. But nobody wants real. They only think they do.